The psychology of silence. How to stay calm when others try to provoke you. People don't test your strength. They test how easily they can make you lose control. And once you understand that single truth, everything changes. Introduction: Why people provoke you. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone said something to you, and you felt that immediate surge, that heat, that automatic impulse to respond, to defend, to prove them wrong? It happened. You remember it. Maybe it was hours ago, maybe yesterday, maybe just this morning. What you felt in that moment wasn't an accident. And what that person did to trigger it wasn't random either. Provocation is not a behavior, it's a strategy. It's a system that has worked for thousands of years because it exploits something fundamental in human psychology. When someone provokes you, they're not looking for information. They're not seeking the truth. They're attempting something far more deliberate. They're attempting to take control. Think about how power actually works in human interaction. Most people believe power is about dominance, about being louder or physically stronger. But that's a child's understanding of power. Real power is something quieter. Real power is the ability to remain unmoved while others move around you. It's the capacity to not react while others react. It's the calm in the center of chaos. When someone provokes you, they're trying to collapse that power. They're trying to pull you from your center into their emotional arena, where rules don't apply, where impulsivity wins, where the loudest voice gets heard. And the moment you step into that arena, you have handed them exactly what they wanted. But here's what most people never understand: the provocation itself is a confession of weakness, not strength. When someone needs to provoke you to feel powerful, it means they have no other tools. It means they cannot influence you through logic, through presence, through genuine authority. So they reach for the only weapon that still works on unprepared minds. Provocation works because we are, at our core, reactive creatures. Our nervous systems are wired for quick responses. Our ancestors survived because they could react instantly to danger. A sound in the bush create, a hostile phase greet, a challenge to status greet. We are built for the savannah, not for the conference room. And we haven't had time to evolve new systems. So the person who understands this, the person who can see the provocation coming and choose not to meet it with creation, that person has become something different. They've moved beyond the automatic. They've become intentional. And that's what we're going to explore together. This isn't about learning to suppress your emotions. It's not about becoming cold or detached or losing your passion. That's a common misunderstanding. The strongest people I've ever encountered were not emotionally dead. They were emotionally intelligent enough to know when to feel and when to think, when to engage and when to remain still. What we're talking about is psychological maturity. It's the ability to feel something and still choose your response. It's the capacity to recognize that being provoked and reacting were two separate events, not one automatic sequence. And that gap between the two, that's where freedom lies. There's a reason certain people seem to move through the world untouched by drama. It's not luck. It's not that they live in isolation from difficult people. They simply understand a system that most people never learn. They understand the psychology of silence. They understand how power actually transfers in human interaction. And most importantly, they understand that the person who remains calm in any situation has already won. Not because they defeated anyone, but because they refused to enter the battle on the other person's terms. In the next several hours, we're going to walk through this system together. We're going to examine how provocation works. We're going to understand why you react the way you do. And more importantly, we're going to rebuild your relationship with your own emotions so that you can remain grounded even when someone is deliberately trying to shake you. This is not a book about being nice. This is not about turning the other cheek or about spiritual transcendence. This is about psychological power. It's about understanding human behavior well enough that you can see through manipulation. It's about being so rooted in yourself that other people's attempts to move you become almost transparent. It's about silence, but not the silence of weakness, the silence of strength. The silence of someone who could respond, but chooses not to. And once you understand that distinction, you'll never see human interaction the same way again. Chapter 1: The Moment of Provocation. There's a moment, a precise moment. And in that moment, everything you do will determine everything that follows. Let me describe it to you. You're in a meeting. Maybe it's with a boss. Maybe it's with a colleague. Maybe it's at a dinner table with family. Then someone says something. It's designed to land. It's shaped by someone who knows your weak points, who knows what will cause you to respond, who has essentially weaponized their knowledge of you. The words hit, and something happens inside you. That's the moment. In that millisecond, there's a split second where you still have a choice. Your nervous system has registered a threat, real or perceived. Your body has begun to mobilize. But you haven't moved yet. You haven't spoken yet. You're in the gateway. You're at the threshold between reaction and response. And most people don't even know that threshold exists. What they experience is a seamless transition from stimulus to behavior. Someone provokes them, and they respond. It feels like one event. It feels automatic, unconscious, beyond their control, and they're right. It is automatic, but here's what they're missing: automation is not destiny. Automation is a habit, and habits can be interrupted. Let me give you a concrete example. A man is at work. He's been working on a project for months. It's good work. He's proud of it. He presents it in a meeting. And one person, maybe it's someone senior, maybe it's someone he thought was his peer, makes a comment. Not directly insulting, but loaded. Something like, "Well, I suppose that's one approach," in a tone that suggests disappointment or curiosity about why he didn't think of anything better. Here's what happens in most people: that comment lands, and immediately there's a heat. There's a felt sense of being questioned, being diminished, being found wanting, and the automatic response is to defend, to immediately explain why the approach is actually good, to correct the skeptic, to protect the self-image. And that defense, that's the moment he loses. Because here's the thing. The person who made the comment got exactly what they wanted. They got a reaction. They got to see him mobilize his emotional resources to defend against a threat that didn't really exist. They got to demonstrate, at least to themselves, that they had leverage over him. But what if he had remained silent, not cold, not dismissive, but simply present? Simply receptive to the comment without needing to immediately counter it. that would have been something entirely different. Silence in that moment would have communicated something far more powerful than any defense could. It would have communicated that the comment didn't penetrate, that he's secure enough in his work to not need immediate validation, that he's not operating from a place of fragility where every piece of feedback feels like a threat to his existence. And to the person making the comment, silence would have been confusing. It would have thrown off their strategy, because their entire approach was based on triggering a reaction. Without the reaction, their move becomes visible. It becomes obvious. They become small. This is the first crucial understanding. Provocation only works if it produces a reaction. Let me repeat that because it's foundational to everything that follows. Provocation only works if it produces a reaction. No reaction and the provocation collapses. It becomes just sound, just words, just an attempt that failed. The provoker is revealed as someone trying to move you, and the fact that they needed to try is itself an admission of something. So the first skill in this system is learning to recognize the moment of provocation, not the provocation itself, the moment, the instant where you're transitioning from stimulus to response. How do you recognize it? It's usually marked by a physical sensation. You might feel heat in your face. You might feel a tightness in your chest. Your hands might tense. Your jaw might clench. Your breathing might shallow. These are all signals that your nervous system has registered a threat and is preparing to mobilize. This is not weakness. This is not something you've done wrong. This is neurology. This is your ancient wiring doing exactly what it evolved to do. But here's the crucial part: you can notice this wiring without being run by it. The moment you notice that physical sensation, you've already begun to separate from it. You've moved from unconscious reaction to conscious awareness, and consciousness is where choice lives. So imagine that same meeting scenario again, but this time, when the comment lands, you notice the heat rising in your face. You notice your chest tightening. And instead of letting that sensation carry you into a defense, you simply observe it. Interesting, I'm having a reaction. My body is treating this comment as a threat. That simple act of observation creates space. That space is where freedom lives. Now you might still respond. You might ask a clarifying question. You might offer additional context. But notice the difference. You're responding from a place of choice, not from a place of automatic threat protection. Your response is shaped by your intelligence, not by your fear. And that distinction is everything. There's another layer to recognizing the moment of provocation, and it's about understanding what's actually happening in the room. Most provocations operate on a very predictable level. Someone makes a comment that's designed to trigger your insecurity, your defensiveness, your ego. It's aimed at a specific wound. And the reason it's aimed there is because the person has observed you enough to know where the wound is. You might be insecure about your intelligence, so they question your logic. You might be insecure about your status, so they make a comment that implies you're beneath them. You might be insecure about your competence, so they suggest you've made a mistake or fallen short. The provocation is always a hypothesis. The person is essentially saying, if I poke here, what happens? And if you react, they've confirmed the hypothesis. They now know exactly where your wound is. They know exactly how to move you. But what if you don't react? What if the provocation lands and you simply absorb it? You acknowledge internally that yes, this person is trying to trigger my insecurity, and you don't fight against that recognition. That's when something shifts. Because now you've confirmed a different hypothesis. You've confirmed that the wound, while real, is not in control of your behavior. You've confirmed that someone else's attempt to move you falls short of its goal. This is what I mean by psychological strength. It's not the absence of wounds. Everyone has wounds. Everyone has insecurities. The strong person is the one who has wounds but isn't run by them. So the moment of provocation is actually the moment of choice. It's the moment where you can decide whether you're going to be an automatic reactor or an intentional responder. And recognizing that moment, truly recognizing it, feeling it in your body, understanding what's happening in the iteration, that's the first step toward freedom from other people's manipulation. Let me give you another scenario, because this is where most people live. A woman is with her family. She shared something personal, something she's working through, and someone, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling, makes a comment that's dismissive. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Or that's not really a problem. Or the slightly more insidious version, I'm just being honest. You need to toughen up. The provocation here is subtle. It's wrapped in the language of care or honesty. But the intent is clear: invalidate her experience, make her doubt herself, reassert hierarchy. And watch what happens in most people. They immediately defend their experience. They immediately try to prove that their problem is real, that their feelings are valid, that the dismissive person is wrong. They spend energy trying to convince someone who isn't actually interested in being convinced. And why? Because the provocation touched something real. It touched the fear that maybe they are overreacting. Maybe they're being dramatic. Maybe they don't have the right to feel what they feel. So they react from that fear. They mobilize their argument. They try to prove their worth. And they lose the moment. What would happen if she simply noticed the comment, recognized it as an attempt to move her, and chose not to engage with it? Not coldly, not dismissively, just calmly acknowledging, you see it that way. I see it differently. No defense, no attempt to convince, no feeding energy into someone else's disrespect. That's the moment. That's where the power is. The moment of provocation is not the comment. It's not the action of the other person. It's the moment right after stimulus where you decide whether this situation is going to control you or whether you're going to control yourself. And once you start recognizing that moment, you'll begin to see provocations everywhere. In conversations, in conflicts, in your own inner dialogue, people provoke constantly. It's a fundamental human strategy. But only in those who react. Chapter 2: Why You React. There's a reason you react. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're bad at controlling yourself. It's because you're human, and humans are designed at a neurological level to react. Let me take you back. Imagine you're living 100,000 years ago. You're on a savanna, you're walking through tall grass, and suddenly you see something move. You don't have time to think. You don't have time to analyze. You react. You jump back. Your heart races. Your muscles tense. You're prepared to run or fight. This reaction saved your ancestors' lives, the ones who paused to think, the ones who analyzed the threat. They didn't make it to pass on their genes. The ones who reacted instantly were the ones who survived. So you inherited a nervous system built for instant reaction. This is crucial to understand. This is not a flaw in your design. This is a feature. Your reactive capacity was brilliant. It was perfect for the environment it evolved in. But you're not on a savanna anymore. You're in an office. You're in a conversation. You're reading a message. And your nervous system is still operating with the same ancient programming. Someone makes a dismissive comment, and your nervous system registers it as a threat to your status, your safety, your existence, and your body mobilizes, just like it would if you saw a predator. This is called the threat response, or sometimes the fight, flight, freeze response. And here's the thing, it happens automatically. You don't decide to feel defensive. You don't choose to get angry. It just happens. The neural circuit fires, and you're in reaction mode before you even know what's occurred. So the first thing to understand about your reactivity is that it's not a personal failure. It's not evidence that you're out of control or weak or bad at managing yourself. It's evidence that you're human. Everyone reacts. Every single person. You've just been trained to believe that your reactions are your fault in a way that's not helpful. But here's the second piece, and this is where it gets interesting. While the initial reaction is automatic, what happens next is not automatic. There's a window. It's very small, but it's there. And in that window, you can interrupt the automatic sequence. Neurologically, what happens is this information comes in. Your thalamus, which is like a gatekeeper in your brain, processes it. The information goes down two pathways. One pathway is very fast and automatic. It goes directly to your amygdala, which is the threat detection center of your brain. Your amygdala reacts instantly. It doesn't think. It just sounds the alarm. But there's a second pathway, a slower one. This pathway goes up to your cortex, to your thinking brain. This is the part of you that can think about what's happening, that can contextualize it, that can decide whether the threat is actually a threat or whether this is just another human being trying to move you. And here's the thing, the slow pathway can override the fast one, but only if you're aware of it. Only if you're paying attention. This is why awareness is so powerful. This is why the moment of provocation is so important. Because in that moment, you can potentially interrupt the automatic sequence and access your thinking brain. But most people don't know this is possible. So they experience their reactions as inevitable. They think, I can't help it. I react that way. That's just who I am. But that's only true if you're unconscious. If you're aware, you have options. Let me tell you about the ego, because the ego is where most reactivity comes from. Your ego is not a bad thing. Your ego is part of your self-concept. It's your sense of who you are, how you fit in the world, what your status is, and your ego is constantly monitoring. It's constantly checking, am I okay? Am I safe? Am I respected? Am I valued? And when something threatens that sense of self, the ego gets activated. It mobilizes. It tries to protect. It tries to restore the sense that you're okay, that you're valuable, that you matter. This is where defensiveness comes from. When someone provokes you, they're almost always hitting the ego. They're making a comment that suggests you're not as smart as you thought, not as competent, not as worthy, not as valuable, and your ego reacts to restore its sense of self-worth. So you defend, you attack back. You find a way to prove them wrong or to make them feel small in return. You mobilize your entire being to defend your sense of self. And here's the genius of understanding this: the moment you understand that's what's happening, the whole dynamic changes. Because you can step back and ask yourself a simple question: does my value depend on what this person thinks? Does my worth depend on proving them wrong? Does my sense of self require that they see me the way I want to be seen? For most people, the answer is no, but they're still reacting as if the answer is yes. They're still mobilizing their ego as if this person's opinion is a threat to their existence. This is where psychological strength comes in. Strength is the ability to hold a stable sense of self that doesn't depend on constant external validation, that doesn't get shaken every time someone questions you or dismisses you or challenges your value. And when you have that kind of strength, provocations lose their power. Because you're not reacting from fear, you're not defending against a threat to your sense of self. You're just observing another human being trying a move that doesn't work on you anymore. Let me talk about specific triggers, because most people have them. A trigger is something that consistently provokes you. It's not random. It's not something you react to once in a while. It's something that, whenever it shows up, sets off your alarm. Maybe your trigger is disrespect. Maybe it's injustice. Maybe it's condescension. Maybe it's being questioned about your competence. Maybe it's being excluded, or whatever it is. There's usually a wound underneath it. The person who disrespects you is hitting a place where you were disrespected before. The person who's condescending is hitting a place where you felt small. The person who questions your competence is hitting a place where you doubted yourself. And your nervous system remembers. It remembers that this kind of wound was dangerous before. So when it shows up now, your system mobilizes as if that old danger is happening again. But here's the thing: you're not that person anymore. That old situation is not happening now. You're being triggered into a false alarm. And understanding that, truly understanding it, and be transformative. I'm going to tell you about a woman named Sarah. She's successful in her career, she's accomplished. But she has a specific trigger. Whenever someone questions her decision-making process, especially in front of others, she becomes reactive, she defends immediately. She becomes pointed, she sometimes says things she regrets. And she couldn't understand it. She knew her decisions were good. She knew she was competent. So why did this particular provocation affect her so strongly? When she really examined it, she realized it went back to her family. Her father, who she loved, frequently questioned whether she was thinking things through. "Are you sure?" he'd ask. "Did you consider this angle?" It was meant to be helpful, but it communicated something else. It communicated that he didn't trust her judgment. And now, decades later, whenever someone questions her decision-making, she's not just defending against that person. She's defending against that old wound. She's trying to prove once again that she's worthy of trust. But the person questioning her now, they're not her father. They're not necessarily saying what he was saying, but she's reacting as if they are. This is the essence of reactivity. We carry our wounds, and when something similar shows up, we react as if the wound is happening again in real time. We react as if the old danger is present. We mobilize our entire being to defend against ghosts. And the person who provoked us, they might not have even known they were hitting a wound. They just happened to stumble onto a trigger. But some people do know. Some people deliberately look for your triggers because they know that's where they can access your reactivity. This is why understanding your triggers is so important. Because if you're aware of your wounds, if you've examined them and made peace with them, then when someone hits them, you can notice the reaction without being run by it. You can say to yourself, there it is. That old fear is getting activated, but this person isn't my father. This situation isn't that situation. I can feel the reaction and still choose my response. And that's freedom. Let me tell you about a different kind of reaction. This one's less obvious. Sometimes reactivity doesn't come from ego at all. Sometimes it comes from a sense of fairness. Someone's been unfair to you. Someone's done something wrong. Someone's violated what you see as basic rules of decency. And your reaction comes from a sense of moral outrage. They shouldn't have done that. That's not right. I need to make them understand how wrong they are. This is a particularly insidious form of reactivity because it feels justified. It feels like you're not being emotional. You're being righteous. But you're still reacting. You're still being controlled by what someone else did. You're still letting their action determine your state. And here's the thing about this kind of reactivity, it's exhausting. Because there's always unfairness. There's always someone doing something wrong. If you're reactive to that, you're in a permanent state of mobilization. The psychologically strong person sees the unfairness. They see the wrongness. But they don't need to immediately correct it. They don't need to make the other person understand. They can acknowledge the reality and move forward without being controlled by it. This doesn't mean they accept injustice. It means they respond to it from a place of power, not from a place of emotional reactivity. There's one more important thing about why you react, and it's about the nature of your attention. Where your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. If you're focused on what someone said that was wrong, if you're replaying it and amplifying it and focusing on how unfair it was, then you're going to stay in a reactive state. But if you can shift your attention, you can shift your state. This is not about pretending something didn't happen. It's not about toxic positivity or false optimism. It's about recognizing that you have choice about what you focus on. You can focus on the provocation and what it says about the other person's character. Or you can focus on what the provocation reveals about your own reactivity. You can focus on being wronged. Or you can focus on how you want to respond. The same situation, completely different emotional outcomes, based on what you choose to direct your attention toward. So why do you react? You react because you're human. Because you inherited ancient wiring designed for a different world. Because you have wounds that get touched by provocations. Because your ego is invested in how you're seen. Because your nervous system still treats social threats like physical threats. None of these are your fault. None of these make you weak or broken. But they are your responsibility to understand and work with. And once you truly understand why you react, the path to not reacting becomes visible. Chapter 3: The Power of the Pause. There is a moment, a very small moment, between when something happens to you and when you respond. And in that moment, everything is decided. This is the pause, and it is the most powerful tool you will ever develop. Let me explain it to you in the most simple way possible. You receive a message, or you hear something, or you see something, stimulus, and then you have a response, behavior, and we usually experience it as immediate. We assume it's automatic. We assume there's no space between the two. But there's always a space. It might be a millisecond, it might be barely perceptible, but it's there. It's the gap between the stimulus and your response, and in that gap lies your power. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, understood this perfectly. He said between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. He understood this not from philosophy but from lived experience. In one of the most extreme situations imaginable, where almost everything was taken from him, he identified that the one thing that couldn't be taken was his ability to choose his response. So if Frankl could find freedom in a concentration camp through that space, then certainly you can find it in your daily life. But how do you access it? How do you create that space? How do you interrupt the automatic sequence? The answer is simple. You pause. This is so simple that most people think it can't possibly work. But it does. When something provocative happens, your instinct is to respond immediately. Your instinct is to react. Your nervous system wants to mobilize and act. But what if you did the opposite? What if you forced yourself to pause? 3 seconds, sometimes that's all you need. Let me describe what happens when you introduce a pause. Someone makes a comment that would normally provoke you. You feel the immediate reaction starting to happen. You feel the heat. You feel the impulse to respond. And then you pause. You take 3 seconds of silence. In those 3 seconds, something changes. Your nervous system, which was mobilizing for immediate action, gets a different signal. It doesn't get the signal to calm down necessarily, but it gets the signal that you're not in immediate danger, that you have time, that this is not a life or death situation that requires instant action. And just that slight signal can shift your state. Additionally, in those 3 seconds, your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, has time to activate. The part of you that can think, that can contextualize, that can consider options. You move from pure reaction to something that includes thought. And you move from being run by your emotions to being aware of them while still having agency. Let me give you a specific scenario. A man is in a meeting with his boss. His boss is reviewing his work, and the boss says something like, "This is fine, but I expected more from someone at your level." Now, for this man, this is a specific trigger. He's always had something to prove. He's always felt slightly behind. And this comment hits that exact nerve. His heart rate increases. He can feel anger rising. He can feel the impulse to defend, to prove the boss wrong, to list all the ways his work is actually great. But what if instead of following that impulse, he pauses? He takes 3 seconds. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't react. He just pauses. And in those 3 seconds, something shifts. The boss made a statement. It was designed to provoke a reaction. But the reaction didn't come. The boss is now waiting. The boss is now uncertain. The energy has changed. The power has inverted. And the man, he's now in his thinking brain. He can recognize what just happened. He can recognize that the boss is testing him, and he can choose how to respond rather than being run by his reaction. Maybe he says, "I appreciate the feedback. Can you be more specific about what you expected?" Cool, collected, not defensive, not trying to prove anything, just gathering information. Or maybe he just nods and says, "Got it," and moves on. The point is not what he says. The point is that what he says comes from choice, not from automatic reactivity. And the difference in outcome is enormous. Let me talk about what happens in the body during a pause. When you're in reaction mode, your nervous system is in what's called sympathetic activation. Your fight-flight-freeze response is activated. Your cortisol and adrenaline are rising. Your body is mobilized. You're in survival mode. But when you pause, when you simply introduce a moment of stillness, your nervous system gets a signal. The signal is we're not dying. We have time. And your body can begin to shift into a different state. Not completely calm necessarily, but not fully mobilized either. This is why breathing is so important. When you pause, even for just 3 seconds, and you pay attention to your breathing, you're directly signaling your nervous system. A slow, intentional breath tells your body that you're safe, that this is not an emergency. So the pause is not passive. It's not about doing nothing. It's about doing something very specific. It's about interrupting the automatic response and giving your body information that things are okay. There's another layer to this, and it's about the information that silence gives to other people. When someone provokes you and you pause instead of reacting, you're communicating something. You're communicating that their words didn't land the way they intended, that you're not reactive, that you have control. The provoker was expecting a specific response. They were expecting you to mobilize, to defend, to fight back, but instead you're still. You're present. You're unmoved. This is deeply destabilizing to them, because their entire strategy was based on triggering a reaction. Without the reaction, their move doesn't work. They're revealed as someone trying to move you, and the fact that they couldn't is itself information. Let me tell you about a woman who learned this. She had a family member who was consistently critical. Nothing she did was good enough. There was always something to correct, something to improve, something that showed her shortcoming. For years she reacted, she defended. She tried to prove she was capable. She mobilized against the criticism. But nothing changed. The criticism kept coming, because the family member had learned that criticism would provoke a reaction. And that reaction was interesting to them. It was a way of maintaining power and control. Then one day something shifted. She decided to try something different. When the critical comment came, instead of defending, she paused. She took a breath, and then she simply said, "I hear you," and moved on. She didn't argue, she didn't defend, she didn't amplify, she just paused and acknowledged. And the family member was confused, Because the move that always worked, criticism creating defensiveness, suddenly didn't work. The criticism landed in a void. There was nothing to grip. There was no reaction to feed off of. And interestingly, over time, the criticism decreased, not because she was being more receptive or more willing to improve, but because the strategy stopped producing the reward it once did. This is the power of the pause applied in real relationships. Now I need to be clear about something. The pause is not about becoming passive. It's not about never speaking up or never defending yourself. It's about creating space so that what you do comes from intentionality rather than reactivity. Sometimes after you pause, you do push back. Sometimes you do defend. Sometimes you do speak your mind. But it's different. It's coming from a different place. It's calibrated. It's strategic. It's not automatic. The pause is also not about ignoring what happened. You're not pretending the provocation didn't occur. You're not denying your reaction. You're just creating space so that your response can be something other than automatic. There's a specific technique that can help with this. It's called the 3-second rule. When you feel yourself being provoked, when you notice that initial surge of reaction, you force yourself to count 3 seconds before you respond. 1, 2, 3. And only after those 3 seconds do you allow yourself to respond. In most cases, if you give your body 3 seconds, the acute surge of adrenaline will decrease. The urgency will decrease. Your thinking brain will activate more. And what you say or do in those 3 seconds later will be markedly different from what you would have said or done in the first second. I'm going to tell you about the research on this. Studies have shown that when you introduce even a small delay between provocation and response, the response itself changes. It becomes less aggressive. It becomes more nuanced. It incorporates more information. Essentially, the pause allows your full cognitive capacity to engage with the situation rather than just your reactive capacity. And the research also shows something else. It shows that when you pause, when you don't immediately react, the other person's aggression actually decreases. This is counterintuitive to most people. They think that if they don't react immediately, they're being weak. They're inviting more aggression. But what actually happens is the opposite. When you don't feed the provocation with a reaction, the provocative energy has nowhere to go. It dissipates. It becomes less intense. Imagine 2 people about to argue. Usually, one person says something aggressive. The other person reacts aggressively and the cycle escalates. Aggression feeding aggression. Reaction breeding reaction. But what if one person breaks that cycle? What if they introduce a pause? What if they don't react with aggression but instead respond calmly? The entire dynamic shifts. It's like throwing a punch and having someone simply stand still rather than fight back. The punch has no resistance. It has no opponent, and the aggressor is suddenly confronted with the reality that their strategy isn't working. This is the pause. It's the interruption of the automatic cycle. And it is one of the most powerful tools for maintaining psychological control. Let me give you another application. What if you apply the pause to your own thinking? You're alone. You're ruminating about something someone said. You're replaying it. You're amplifying it. You're building a story about what it means. what it says about you, what you should do about it. And your nervous system is starting to activate. You're getting activated by your own thinking. What if you paused? You notice the rumination, you notice the activation, and you pause. You introduce a moment of stillness. You interrupt the automatic cycle of thinking and reacting and thinking more. And in that pause, you might ask yourself, is this thought serving me? Is this story I'm telling myself true? Is this something I need to be activated about right now? And very often the answer is no. The pause creates space for wisdom. It creates space for your higher self to observe the lower self spiraling. And from that space you can choose. You can choose to keep thinking about it or not. You can choose to take action or not. You can choose to let it go or not. But it's a choice. It's not automatic. This is the deep power of the pause. It's not just a technique for managing provocations from other people. It's a fundamental tool for managing your own mind, for interrupting your own automatic patterns, for creating space where your conscious intention can operate. And once you start using it, once you understand the power of simply introducing a moment of stillness between stimulus and response, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Chapter 4: How to Master Your Emotional State. Your emotional state is not something that happens to you. It's something you can influence, manage, and ultimately direct. Now I know what you might be thinking. Emotions are involuntary. They just happen. They come over me. And you're partially right. The initial emotional reaction is involuntary. But your emotional state, the overall tenor of how you're feeling, how reactive you are, how available you are to be triggered, that's something you have significant influence over. And this is important because someone who is in a calm, grounded emotional state is much less likely to be provoked than someone who is already activated, frustrated, or depleted. Think about it. Have you noticed that some days, provocations that would normally upset you barely register, and other days the same provocations feel like major threats? The difference is your emotional state. On the days when you're calm, grounded, well-rested, well-fed, and centered, provocations lose their power. They become obvious attempts to move you. They're transparent. But on the days when you're already stressed, tired, hungry, or emotionally depleted, the same provocations land harder. They feel more threatening. They're more likely to trigger a reaction. So one of the most important things you can do to become less reactive is to manage your baseline emotional state. This is unsexy work. It's not as interesting as learning advanced psychological techniques, but it's foundational. It's the base layer. Let me talk about what affects your emotional state. First, sleep. This is non-negotiable. When you're sleep deprived, your emotional regulation gets worse. Your amygdala, that threat-detection center in your brain, becomes hyperactive. Your cortisol, your stress hormone, stays elevated. You're more reactive. You're more prone to emotional dysregulation. When you're well-rested, your entire nervous system is different. You're calmer. You're more resilient. You can handle provocations that would otherwise set you off. This is why some of the most controlled people you know probably have good sleep habits. It's not a coincidence. Second, movement. Your body and your mind are not separate. The state of your body directly affects the state of your mind. When you move your body, when you exercise, when you get out of stillness, something changes in your nervous system. Stress hormones get processed. Endorphins get released. Your body gets the signal that it's safe, that it's capable, that it can handle things. And when you're moving regularly, when your body is getting that physical outlet, you're less reactive. You have more capacity to absorb provocations without getting triggered. People who are sedentary tend to be more reactive. They tend to have provocations land harder because they haven't given their nervous system the outlet it needs. So if you want to be less reactive, move your body, not because you need to look good, but because it directly affects your emotional regulation. Third, attention to nutrition. Now, I'm not here to tell you what diet to follow, but I will tell you that what you eat affects your mood, your energy, and your ability to regulate your emotions. Sugar crashes lead to emotional instability. Caffeine overload leads to anxiety and reactivity. Dehydration affects cognitive function and emotional regulation. Someone who is eating a steady diet of sugar and caffeine is going to be more reactive than someone who is eating stable nutrition. This is not about being perfect. This is about noticing the connection between what goes into your body and how you feel and how reactive you are. Fourth, breathing. And this is something you can do right now. Your breathing directly affects your nervous system. Slow, deep breathing signals your body that you're safe. It activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming system. Fast, shallow breathing does the opposite. It signals your body that you're in danger. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress system. So one of the most direct ways to shift your emotional state is to change your breathing. When you feel yourself getting activated, when you notice a provocation is starting to affect you, you can immediately slow your breathing. You can take deeper breaths, and your nervous system will shift. This is not magical. This is neurology. Let me teach you a specific breathing technique. It's called box breathing, and it's been used by military personnel, first responders, and anyone who needs to maintain calm under pressure. The technique is simple. You breathe in for 4 counts. You hold for 4 counts. You breathe out for 4 counts. And you hold empty for 4 counts. And you repeat this cycle anywhere from 5 to 10 times. The effect is significant. Your heart rate will slow. Your mind will become clearer. Your emotional activation will decrease. And you can do this anywhere, in a meeting, before a difficult conversation, when you feel yourself getting triggered. 5 cycles of box breathing and your entire system is different. There's another layer to managing your emotional state, and it's about attention management. Where your attention goes, your emotional energy follows. If you're constantly paying attention to threatening things, news, conflicts, things that might go wrong, then your emotional baseline is going to be one of stress and readiness. But if you're conscious about what you direct your attention toward, you can manage your emotional state differently. This is not about ignoring reality or living in denial. It's about being intentional about where you focus. Some things demand attention. Real threats demand attention. Situations that require your engagement demand attention. But many of the things we pay attention to don't demand it. They're optional. We're choosing to focus on them, and we can choose differently. If you're someone who checks social media first thing in the morning and ends up scrolling through negativity and comparison, then your emotional state for the rest of the day is affected. You're starting from a place of stress and inadequacy. But what if you started differently? What if you started with something grounding? Movement, meditation, time in nature, a meaningful activity? Your emotional baseline for the day would be completely different. The same with news. If you're constantly consuming news about conflict and crisis, your baseline emotional state is going to reflect that. You're going to feel more threatened, more reactive, more on edge. But if you're conscious about your information diet, if you're selective about what you consume, then your emotional state is different. This is what I mean by managing your state. It's not about becoming numb or disconnected. It's about being intentional about what you expose yourself to. Now let me talk about something that's more internal. Something about how you relate to your own emotions. Most people have been taught to either suppress their emotions or be controlled by them. They've been taught that emotions are either dangerous and need to be locked down, or that emotions are authoritative and you need to follow them. But there's a third option. There's the option of having emotions without being run by them. This is called emotional awareness or emotional intelligence. It works like this. An emotion arises: fear, anger, hurt, shame. You notice it. You don't suppress it. You don't act on it immediately. You simply observe it. You allow it to be there. And here's the interesting thing: when you stop fighting an emotion, when you stop trying to get rid of it, it changes. It becomes less intense. It becomes something you can hold without being overwhelmed by it. Think of an emotion like a wave. If you try to fight a wave, if you tense against it, the struggle intensifies everything. But if you simply let the wave pass through you, if you relax into it, then it moves. It has its moment and it passes. But most people fight their waves. They fight their emotions. And the fight creates more intensity. So when you're triggered, when provocation creates an emotional reaction, instead of immediately reacting or suppressing, you can do something else. You can create space. You can observe the emotion. You can ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What triggered it? What is this emotion trying to tell me? And as you do that, as you bring awareness and curiosity to the emotion rather than judgment and fear, something shifts. You're no longer at the mercy of the emotion. You're in relationship with it. Let me give you a concrete example. Someone makes a dismissive comment about your work. You feel anger rising. The automatic response would be to defend, to attack back, to make them understand how wrong they are. But what if you paused and asked yourself, what am I really feeling? Am I angry, or am I hurt that my work was dismissed? Am I afraid that they're right? Am I embarrassed? Often what we call anger is actually something underneath. It's fear, it's hurt, it's shame. And anger is the protective response that covers those more vulnerable feelings. But the moment you get below the anger and identify the actual feeling, the actual emotion, something changes. You can now respond to what's actually true rather than to the protective anger. You might realize that you're hurt because you care about this work, and dismissal feels personal. And from that awareness, you might respond differently. You might ask a clarifying question. You might acknowledge your feelings internally and move on. You might decide this isn't someone whose opinion needs to matter to you. But whatever you do, you're doing it from awareness, not from reactivity. This is what it means to manage your emotional state. It's not about being calm all the time. It's not about never feeling difficult emotions. It's about having agency with your emotions rather than being run by them. Let me talk about one more thing because it's important. Your emotional state is also affected by your sense of meaning and purpose. Someone who is connected to something meaningful, someone who feels like their life matters, someone who has a sense of purpose, that person is much less reactive to provocations. Because provocations only have power when they threaten something important to you. If you're completely disconnected from meaning, if you don't care about anything, then nothing can provoke you. But that's not a good kind of peace. That's emptiness. But if you're connected to something that matters, a project, a relationship, a mission, a value, then you become harder to provoke in a different way. You become hard to provoke because you're not seeking validation from provokers. You're not looking for approval from people who are trying to move you. You have something real that matters to you, and that is more powerful than any provocation. So managing your emotional state also means connecting to what matters to you. What do you care about? What moves you? What would you be willing to stand for? When you're connected to that, when you know what matters, then other things have less power. Someone dismissing you matters less when you're connected to a project that matters. Someone questioning your value matters less when you know what you value. Someone trying to move you matters less when you're already moved by something that's true to you. So this is the architecture of emotional mastery. It starts with the basic sleep, movement, nutrition, breathing. It moves to attention management where you focus, what you consume, what you expose yourself to. It includes emotional awareness, the ability to notice and be in relationship with your emotions rather than suppressed by them or controlled by them. And it's grounded in meaning, a sense of what matters, what you care about, what you're moving toward. When all of these are in place, your emotional baseline is different. You're calmer, you're more resilient, you're less reactive. And provocations, when they come, have much less power. Chapter 5: Silence as a Weapon. There is a silence that is passive. And there is a silence that is active. A silence that is strategic. A silence that is powerful. Most people don't understand the difference. Passive silence is when you say nothing because you have nothing to say, or because you're overwhelmed, or because you're afraid to speak. It's a silence of absence. But active silence is different. Active silence is a choice. It's a decision to not engage, even though you could. It's a demonstration of control. And active silence is one of the most powerful tools you have for psychological influence. Let me explain how this works at a neurological level. When someone speaks, they are creating a prediction. They are predicting how you will respond. They are anticipating your reaction. Their nervous system is aligned with that expectation. But when you don't respond as expected, when you respond with silence instead of the predicted response, something happens. There's a mismatch. There's a prediction error, and your nervous system processes that mismatch. The person was expecting you to defend, and you said nothing. The person was expecting you to explain, and you were silent. The person was expecting emotion, and you were still. This mismatch is deeply affecting. It creates uncertainty. It creates a moment where the person who thought they understood the interaction suddenly realizes they don't. And in that uncertainty, they're forced to reassess. This is why silence is so powerful. Let me give you a scenario. A man is in a conversation with a colleague who is being critical. The colleague is pointing out flaws, questioning decisions, implying that the man's work is not good enough. The normal response would be to defend, to explain, to counter the criticism, to prove the colleague wrong. And the colleague is expecting this. The colleague's nervous system is primed for conflict. The colleague is ready to debate, to defend their criticisms, to win the argument. But what if the man simply listened? What if he let the colleague finish and then said nothing? What if he met the criticism with silence? The colleague is now confused. This is not the expected response. The colleague is waiting for a reaction that isn't coming, and in that waiting something shifts. The colleague might feel the need to fill the silence. The colleague might become uncomfortable. The colleague might realize, in that silence, that they're being critical for no reason, just to maintain a sense of control or dominance. And the man who responded with silence has now demonstrated something powerful. He's demonstrated that the colleague's criticism doesn't disturb him, that it doesn't require an immediate response, that he's not reactive. And in that demonstration, the power dynamic has shifted. There's something about silence that commands respect. When someone is quiet, when someone is still, when someone is not performing or defending or explaining, there's something compelling about it. It draws attention. It creates a sense that this person knows something you don't, that this person has resources that you don't understand. Think about people you know who have presence, who seem to have authority not because they're loud or aggressive, but because they're somehow still and grounded. Most of them have learned the power of silence. They don't fill every gap in conversation. They don't rush to explain. They don't defend against every criticism. They sit with things. They let things breathe. And that quality, that comfort with sound, is what gives them presence. Now, silence can be misunderstood. It can be perceived as coldness or as anger or as dismissal if you're not intentional about it. That's why the quality of the silence matters. The silence needs to come from a place of grounding, not from a place of suppression or rage. The difference is subtle but real. An angry silence is tense. It's held. It's compressed. You can feel the suppressed emotion underneath it. And people pick up on that. They know you're angry. But a grounded silence is different. It's open. It's calm. It's not suppressing anything. It's just a person who is present, who is not disturbed, who is not reacting. And that's the silence you want to develop. Let me talk about the mechanics of this. When you're silent in response to a provocation, you're essentially saying something without words. You're saying your attempt to provoke me didn't work. Your strategy didn't land. I'm still here. I'm still grounded and I'm not reacting. And that message is often more powerful than any words you could say. Think about it from the perspective of the person provoking. They make a move. They're hoping for a specific response. And instead they get nothing. They get a void. their attack disappears into emptiness. For someone who is seeking dominance or control through provocation, this is deeply unsettling, because their strategy depends on creating a reaction. Without the reaction, they're powerless. And you, the person who remains silent, have just demonstrated that you're not available to be controlled through provocation. That's a powerful statement. There's another dimension to silence as a tool, and it's about information. When you're silent, you're not giving information. You're not revealing your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions. You're maintaining mystery. In human interaction, mystery is power. The person who is known completely, who reveals everything, who is transparent to the point of having no boundaries, that person has no power. But the person who is somewhat unknowable, who doesn't reveal everything, who maintains some private, that person has power. This is why people are drawn to others who are somewhat private, somewhat mysterious, because there's a sense that they know something you don't, that there's depth there, that they're not easily read. And silence is a way of maintaining that mystery. By not reacting, by not explaining, by not defending, you're saying you don't get to fully know me. You don't get to predict exactly what I'll do or feel or say. I'm more than your provocation can access. And that is power. Let me tell you about a woman named Elena. Elena had a boss who was critical and condescending. The boss would make comments that were meant to undermine Elena's confidence. Comments about her work, her intelligence, her capabilities. For a long time, Elena responded. She would defend. She would explain. She would try to prove the boss wrong or prove that she was actually capable. And the boss loved it. The boss got to see Elena mobilized, defensive, invested in proving something. It was a form of control. Then Elena realized something. She realized that her defensiveness was giving the boss exactly what the boss wanted. So Elena changed her strategy. The next time the boss made a critical comment, Elena simply said, "Okay," and moved on. No explanation, no defense, no attempt to convince the boss otherwise. Just okay. At first, the boss didn't know what to do. The boss escalated. The boss made another critical comment. More pointed, more personal, still trying to get a rise out of Elena. And Elena again responded with minimal engagement. She acknowledged the comment. She didn't fight it. She didn't defend. She just moved on. And over time, something remarkable happened. The boss's criticisms decreased. Not because Elena was being more receptive or changing her work, but because the strategy of criticism had stopped working. The boss was no longer getting the feedback loop that made the criticism feel powerful. Elena's sullen, not angry silence, but grounded silence, had fundamentally changed the dynamic. This is silence as a weapon, not cruelty, not coldness, but strategic non-engagement. There's a specific phrase I want to introduce. It's called the non-response. A non-response is when someone says something to you, and instead of responding to the content of what they said, you respond to something else entirely, or you don't respond at all. For example, someone says you always mess things up, and you could respond to the content, "No, I don't. Here's evidence that I'm competent," but that's playing their game. That's engaging with their provocation. Alternatively, you could give a non-response. You could say, That's your perspective, and move on, or you could simply not engage with it at all. A non-response is a way of signaling that you don't accept the frame that the person is offering. You don't accept that this is a situation where you need to defend. You don't accept that their criticism is your responsibility to address. And that is very powerful. The non-response is also useful because it doesn't escalate. It doesn't continue the conflict. It doesn't match the aggression of the provocation. It simply removes you from the game. And when you remove yourself from the game, the other person is left playing alone. Now, I want to be clear about something. Silence is not always the right response. There are situations where you need to speak, where you need to be direct, where you need to set boundaries or correct misinformation. But the power I'm talking about, the power to influence through silence, comes from the fact that you have the option to speak, and you're choosing not to. That's what makes it powerful. If someone is silenced because they're afraid or overwhelmed or powerless, that's not the same thing. That's not the tool we're talking about. The silence that has power is the silence of someone who could speak but is choosing not to. The silence of someone who is in control of their response. And the moment that distinction is clear to you, the moment you understand that your silence is a choice, not a compulsion, then silence becomes a tool rather than a limitation. Let me talk about what happens when you develop the capacity for strategic silence. First, you become harder to manipulate, because manipulation depends on certain patterns. People expect certain responses. When you don't provide those responses, when you introduce silence, manipulation becomes less effective. Second, you develop presence. There's something about someone who is comfortable with silence that creates presence. It's like they're more real, more grounded, more significant. Third, people become more careful about how they treat you, because they learn that their provocations don't work on you, that you're not available to be controlled through provocation, and that changes how they approach you. Fourth, you save enormous amounts of energy, because you're not constantly defending. You're not constantly explaining. You're not constantly trying to convince people of things they don't actually care about. You're just grounded. And that grounded quality, that presence, that strategic silence, that's what creates real power. Chapter 6: Provocations in Real Life. Let me take you into the real world. Because theory is beautiful, but real life is where this actually matters. I'm going to walk you through scenarios, common scenarios you've probably experienced, and I'm going to show you how the principles we've discussed apply when the stakes are real and emotions are high. Let's start with the workplace. You're in a meeting with your team. You've presented an idea, and someone, maybe a colleague, maybe someone senior, makes a comment, not directly attacking the idea, but suggesting that it's not original, or that it's been tried before, or that it might not work. In that moment, something happens inside you. You feel something. Maybe it's frustration, maybe it's defensiveness, maybe it's embarrassment because your idea was just dismissed in front of others. Your automatic impulse is to respond, to push back, to explain why the idea is actually good, to defend your intelligence and your competence. But here's what you've learned. You've learned that moment between stimulus and response is crucial. So you pause, you take a breath, You notice the impulse to defend but don't act on it immediately. And then you respond from a different place. Maybe you say, "That's an interesting perspective. Have you seen something similar work?" Or maybe you simply say, "I appreciate the feedback," and move on. Notice what's different about this response. It's not defensive. It's not trying to prove something. It's coming from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity. And the effect in the room is different. Instead of an escalation, there's a sense that you're securing your idea. You're not shaken. You're not threatened. You're simply considering input. And to the person who made the comment, this response is disarming because they were expecting defensiveness. And instead they got creeptiveness. They were expecting a fight. And instead they got calm. Their provocation didn't land the way they expected. Let's move to another scenario. You're with your family. You're having a meal. And someone, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling, says something about you. A criticism, a judgment. Something that you've heard many times before. And in that moment, something ancient gets triggered. Because family provocations hit deep, they hit at the part of you that still seeks approval from these people. The part of you that wants to be seen as good, as capable, as worthy. Your automatic response might be to defend, to explain why the criticism is unfair, to get angry, to leave the room, to withdraw. But what if you tried something different? What if you recognized the provocation for what it is? What if you understood that the person making the comment is likely doing what they've always done, trying to maintain a certain dynamic, trying to feel a certain way about themselves by diminishing you? That recognition itself is powerful. And then what if you responded without the automatic defensiveness? What if you said something like, "I hear you," and then simply continued eating, or changed the subject, or acknowledged their perspective without accepting it? No drama, no escalation, no attempt to convince them that they're wrong. Just a calm, boundaried response that says, "I'm aware of what you're doing, and it doesn't move me." The person might push harder. They might escalate their criticism. But that escalation is a sign that their strategy isn't working. They're trying harder because the easy button isn't being pressed anymore. And you, by maintaining your calm and your boundaries, have just demonstrated something powerful. You've demonstrated that you can be in relationship with this person without being controlled by them. Let me give you another real scenario. You're in a situation where you've made a mistake. You've done something wrong, and someone is calling you on it. This is a particularly vulnerable moment because you're already activated by the reality of having made a mistake. And now someone is amplifying it. Someone is using it to make a point. Someone is using your mistake to diminish you. In this situation, the urge to defend can be even stronger because you're already feeling bad about yourself, and now someone is adding to it. But this is also a powerful opportunity. What if you could acknowledge the mistake without defending it? What if you could say something like, "You're right. I made a mistake. That was poor judgment on my part," and then move on? No excuse, no explanation, no attempt to soften the reality of what happened. Just a clear acknowledgement of the fact. And here's what's interesting. When you respond that way, the person's provocation loses its power because the provocation was designed to make you defensive. to make you distort the reality, to make you fight against what happened. But if you simply accept the reality, if you own the mistake, then there's nothing for the other person to provoke. Your mistake is just a fact. It's not a threat to your sense of self anymore. And that's freedom. Let me tell you about a man named David. David is in a difficult marriage. His wife is critical, often dismissive, frequently brings up his failures, and for years, he reacted, he defended, he attacked back. He tried to convince her that she was wrong about him. And the dynamic just got worse, because his defensiveness gave her more material. His reactions confirmed her criticisms. The cycle perpetuated. Then David learned about the pause, about strategic silence, about not reacting to provocations. The next time his wife criticized him, he simply said, "You feel that way," and didn't engage further. His wife was confused. She tried again. Stronger criticism, more personal attacks. And David again didn't react. He didn't defend. He didn't attack back. He just remained calm. And over time something shifted, not because David changed, but because his wife realized that her strategy of criticism wasn't getting her what she wanted anymore. It wasn't creating the conflict that somehow felt familiar and important to her. The dynamic fundamentally changed because David stopped playing the game. Now, I want to be clear. This doesn't mean David accepted mistreatment. He still had boundaries, but his boundaries were communicated calmly, not creatively. He would say things like, "I understand you feel that way, but I'm not available to be spoken to that way," and he would leave the room. No anger, no drama, just a boundary. And boundaries communicated calmly are far more powerful than boundaries communicated from reactivity. Let me give you a scenario that's particularly difficult: social dynamics. You're in a group, maybe it's friends, maybe it's colleagues, and someone makes a joke at your expense, or says something that's subtly dismissive, or excludes you in some way. And in a group context, there's additional pressure. Because your response is public, other people are watching, and there's an implicit rule that you need to respond in a certain way, or you'll be perceived as weak or unable to take a joke. So the pressure to react defensively is even stronger. But this is also where calm non-creativity is most powerful. If you simply let the comment pass, if you don't take the bait, if you remain unmoved, something happens in the group dynamic. Other people notice, other people register that you're not reactive, that you're not available to be moved by provocation. And over time, people learn not to provoke you, because it doesn't work, because you're not available to be controlled through provocation. The person who made the comment might feel a momentary sense that they've failed at their attempt at humor or dominance. But more importantly, everyone in the group now understands something about you. You're not someone who can be easily moved. And that understanding is far more valuable than any witty comeback you could have delivered. Let me give you another scenario: online interaction. Someone writes something critical. Maybe it's a comment on something you've posted. Maybe it's a direct message. Maybe it's something someone else sent to you. And you feel that immediate surge. You feel the urge to respond, to defend, to explain, to counter their argument, to prove them wrong. And the gap between when you read it and when you want to respond, it's almost non-existent. But this is where the pause becomes crucial. Because in the digital realm, your response is permanent. It's recorded, it's public, and a reactive response can create consequences you didn't intend. So the practice is this: when you read something provocative online, you pause, you don't respond immediately. You wait, you let the surge pass, you let your thinking brain activate. And then, after time has passed, you decide whether a response is even warranted, whether this deserves your energy, whether engaging will serve you or just feed the dynamic. Often after the pause, the answer is no. You decide not to respond at all. And that decision to not engage is a demonstration of strength online. It shows that you're not reactive, that you're not available to be provoked by strangers, that you have better things to do with your energy. Let me talk about a particularly difficult scenario: confrontation with someone who has power over you. Maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's someone whose opinion or approval matters to you, and this person says something provocative. The pressure to react is intense because the stakes feel high. You might fear consequences. You might fear that not defending yourself will be interpreted as weakness or agreement. But this is precisely where the principles we've discussed are most valuable. Because when you can remain calm, when you can avoid reactivity even when the stakes feel high, you demonstrate something powerful. You demonstrate that you're not desperate. You're not seeking their approval. You're not willing to compromise your own groundedness for their validation. And sometimes, that calmness is what finally earns respect from someone who's been trying to control you through provocations. Let me give you an example. A woman is in a job interview. The interviewer makes a comment that's subtly condescending. Something that suggests the interviewer doubts the woman's capabilities. The woman feels that surge. She feels the urge to defend, to list her accomplishments, to prove her worth. But what if she pauses? What if she takes a breath and responds calmly? She might say something like, "I understand that might be your initial impression. Let me walk you through my experience and then share what's relevant without defensiveness." Or she might let the comment pass, acknowledge it without accepting it, and move on to the next question. Notice what's happening. She's not suppressing her competence or her worth. She's not accepting the interviewer's assessment. She's simply not being moved by it. She's remaining grounded. And to the interviewer, that groundedness is impressive. That lack of reactivity, that calm presence, that confidence that doesn't depend on the interviewer's approval, these things are actually more compelling than any defensive response would be. This is how real strength works in real interactions. It's not about winning arguments. It's not about proving people wrong. It's about remaining grounded when someone is trying to move you. It's about having such a stable sense of yourself that other people's provocations become transparent. And when you can do that consistently, when you can do that across different contexts and with different people, then your entire experience of the world changes. Provocations lose their power. Difficult people become less difficult. Conflicts become less intense. Because you stop playing the game that requires reactivity to function. Chapter 7: Psychological Superiority. Let me be direct about something. When you develop the capacity to remain calm when others are trying to provoke you, you gain something that most people would call an advantage. But I want to reframe that word. It's not an advantage in the traditional sense. It's not that you're better than other people. It's that you've developed a capacity that most people haven't. And that capacity creates a distinct psychological superiority. Now, that word superiority makes people uncomfortable, and I understand why. We're taught that comparing ourselves to others is unhealthy, that thinking we're better than others is arrogant. But I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the objective reality that someone who can remain calm under provocation has a capacity that someone who is reactive doesn't have. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. And understanding that fact, accepting that fact, is important. Because once you understand that calm is actually a form of power, a form of real, tangible power, then you start to value your own calm in a different way. You start to protect it. You start to cultivate it. You understand that your equilibrium is not a weakness. It's a strength. Let me explain what I mean by psychological superiority. Think about power in human interaction. How does power actually transfer? Most people think power transfers through dominance, through being louder, more aggressive, more physically imposing, but that's a limited understanding. Real power transfers through the ability to remain unmoved while others move. It transfers through having resources that others don't have. It transfers through staying calm when others panic. In any conflict, the person who maintains their emotional equilibrium has an advantage. They can think, they can strategize, they can respond rather than react. And the person who loses their emotional equilibrium is at a disadvantage. They're operating from fear, they're in survival mode. They have less access to their intelligence. This is a well-documented psychological reality. When your nervous system is activated, when you're in a threat response, your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, is literally less active. You have less access to logic, creativity, empathy, and strategic thinking. You're operating from a more primitive part of your brain. But when you're calm, when your nervous system is regulated, your prefrontal cortex is active. You have access to all your resources. So psychological superiority is simply the result of having access to more of your capacity than the person you're in interaction with. You're thinking, they're reacting, you're strategizing, they're emotional, you're in control. They're being controlled. That's not arrogance. That's just how it works. Let me give you a concrete example. Two people are in a negotiation. One person is calm and strategic. The other person is emotional and reactive. The person who is calm can listen carefully. They can understand the other person's real interests. They can notice inconsistencies. They can stay flexible and adapt their approach. The person who is reactive is operating from emotion. They're defending against perceived threats. They're rigid. They're locked into a position. They're not listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk. And the outcome of the negotiation, the calm person almost always gets more of what they want. Not because they're smarter, but because they have access to more of their capacity. This is what psychological superiority means in practical terms. It's the edge that comes from being grounded when others are not. It's the advantage that comes from thinking clearly when others are clouded by emotion. It's the power that comes from having choice when others are controlled by their reactions. And here's the thing, this superiority is available to anyone. It's not something you're born with. It's something you develop. It's a skill. It's a practice. And anyone who is willing to do the work, to develop awareness, to practice the pause, to manage their emotional state, to understand their triggers, and develop this capacity. So psychological superiority is not about being inherently better than others. It's about having developed a capacity that gives you an advantage in navigating human interaction and conflict. Let me talk about the practical applications of this. If you have psychological superiority, you're harder to manipulate, because manipulation depends on predictable reactions. If you don't react predictably, manipulation doesn't work. You're harder to control, because control depends on having leverage over you. If you're not reactive, the leverage disappears. You're more persuasive, because people are drawn to calm, grounded people. People respect them. People listen to them. You have more influence, because influence is built on credibility and presence, and calm presence creates both. You win more conflicts, not because you fight harder, but because you maintain your capacity to think and strategize while the other person is lost in emotion. You navigate relationships more successfully because you're not triggered into reacting. You can be genuinely present with people. You can hear what they're really saying beneath their words. Let me tell you about a man named Michael. Michael is a negotiator. He works in business environments where significant amounts of money are at stake, and he's known for being extraordinarily effective. People have tried to understand his secret. Is he the smartest person in the room? Not necessarily. Is he the most experienced? Sometimes, but not always. Does he have special techniques? But what he does have is psychological superiority. He's completely unshakable. When others become emotional, when others get reactive, Michael gets calm. He listens more. He thinks more. He observes more. And by the time the negotiation is over, he has what he wants. And it's not through aggression or manipulation. It's through clarity and calm. This is psychological superiority in practice. Now I want to talk about something important, and that's the ethics of psychological superiority. Just because you have the capacity to remain unmoved, just because you have access to your full cognition while others are emotional, doesn't mean you should use that to manipulate or harm people. Psychological superiority can be used ethically or unethically. Used unethically, it's a tool for manipulation. It's a way to take advantage of people who are reactive. It's a way to control people who don't have access to their own resources. But used ethically, it's a tool for navigating the world with integrity. It's a way to remain grounded in what matters to you. It's a way to influence others toward better outcomes without resorting to manipulation. The person with psychological superiority, if they're ethical, uses their capacity not to dominate but to navigate effectively. They use their calm to de-escalate conflicts rather than escalate them. They use their clarity to see what's actually true rather than what's distorted. They use their influence to move things in directions that serve everyone, not just themselves. And that's the highest use of psychological superiority. Let me talk about what it feels like to have psychological superiority. There's a particular quality that develops. It's not arrogance. It's not coldness. It's actually a kind of relaxation. Because once you understand that provocations don't have to move you, you can relax your defenses. You can stop bracing for threats. You can stop managing your image so carefully. You become lighter. There's less to defend. There's less that can be threatened. There's less that feels dangerous. And from that lightness comes a kind of ease. An ease in social situations. An ease in conversations. An ease in your own skin. Because you're not constantly monitoring how you're being perceived. You're not constantly defending against potential threats. You're just present. And that presence is what creates psychological superiority, and the psychological superiority reinforces the presence, and the cycle continues. People are drawn to that. They want to be in the presence of someone who has that. There's something calming about being near someone who is unmoved. It literally affects your own nervous system. When you're with someone who is calm, your own nervous system tends to shift. You become more calm. Your body recognizes safety. But when you're with someone who is reactive, your nervous system goes on alert. You become more reactive. Your body prepares for conflict. So the person who has psychological superiority is literally changing the nervous systems of the people around them just through their presence. This is real power. Not the loud kind, not the aggressive kind, but the kind that actually moves things. The kind that actually creates lasting influence. Let me talk about the final component of psychological superiority, and this is crucial. It's the capacity to choose your battles. One of the things that develops when you have psychological superiority is discrimination. You develop the capacity to see which provocations matter and which don't. Which conflicts are worth engaging with and which are not. Most people are reactive to everything. Every provocation feels important. Every criticism feels like a threat. Every conflict feels like something that needs to be won. But someone with psychological superiority knows better. They understand that not every provocation deserves a response. That not every opinion needs to be defended against. That not every conflict deserves their energy. So they can let things go. They can let people be wrong about them. They can let conflicts resolve without them. And that capacity to choose which battles to fight is actually the deepest form of power. Because it means your energy is not wasted on defending against every attack. Your energy is reserved for what actually matters. Your power is concentrated where it counts. And the person who conserves their energy in this way is ultimately more powerful than the person who reacts to everything and everyone. This is the architecture of psychological superiority. It's built on calm. It's built on the capacity to remain grounded. It's built on access to your full cognition and capacity. And it's built on the wisdom to know what deserves your energy and what doesn't. And once you understand this, when you really understand it, you stop viewing calmness as weakness and start viewing it as strength. You stop viewing non-reactivity as something missing and start viewing it as something gained. And your entire relationship to yourself and to other people transforms. closing the invitation to silence. We've traveled a long way together. We started with an understanding people test you not to measure your strength, but to find your weaknesses. They test to see how easily they can move you. And we've explored why that's true. We've explored the psychology beneath it. We've explored how it works. But more importantly, we've explored the path to freedom from that dynamic. We've learned that between stimulus and response there's a space, and in that space is your power. We've learned that the pause, that small interruption in the automatic sequence, can change everything. We've learned that your emotional state is something you can influence, not something that happens to you. That sleep, movement, breathing, attention management, these are not luxuries. These are the foundations of psychological stability. We've learned that silence is not weakness, that silence, when it comes from a place of groundedness, is one of the most powerful tools available to you. We've learned that provocations in real life, at work, with family, in relationships, online, all follow the same pattern, and once you understand the pattern, you can respond to any provocation with intention rather than reaction. And we've learned that this opacity, this freedom from creativity, reaches something we can call psychological superiority. Not superiority over other people in a way that diminishes them, but superiority in your own capacity, in your access to your full resources. But here's the thing. All of this knowledge means nothing if you don't practice it. Understanding is one thing, integration is another. So I want to end by inviting you into practice. Starting today, starting right now, I want you to notice the provocations in your life. Notice when someone is trying to move you. Notice when a situation is designed to trigger your reaction. And notice the moment of provocation, that moment between stimulus and response. See if you can introduce a pause, even just 3 seconds. Even just one conscious breath. Notice what happens when you pause instead of react. Notice what it feels like. Notice how the other person responds. This is the practice. It won't be perfect. You'll forget sometimes. You'll react without pausing. You'll get caught in the automatic sequence. But each time you catch it, each time you remember, each time you pause instead of react, you're building something. You're building the capacity for freedom. And over time, this capacity becomes your baseline. It becomes who you are. The provocations that once moved you become transparent. The people trying to control you through provocation become obvious. And you move through the world with a groundedness that most people never develop. There's something I want to tell you about silence. Silence gets a bad rap in our culture. We live in an age of noise. We think silence is empty or dead or weak. But silence is alive. Silence is full of potential. Silence is where power lies. In the silence beneath your thoughts, there's a deeper intelligence. In the silence beneath your reactions, there's a calm that's unshakable. In the silence beneath the noise of the world, there's a truth that won't move. And a person who can access that silence, who can drop down into it beneath all the noise, beneath all the provocation, beneath all the attempts to move them, that person is free. Not free from difficulty, not free from having to navigate a complex world with difficult people in it, but free from being controlled by provocation, free from being moved by other people's agendas, free from being reactive to every stimulus. Just free. This is what the psychology of silence offers you. It's not a promise that you'll never be triggered again. It's a path toward becoming someone who can be triggered and not react. Someone who can be provoked and stay grounded. Someone who moves through the world with such calm presence that others sense something in them they don't quite understand. Something solid, something unshakable, something real. And that's the gift of understanding the psychology of silence. So I leave you with this. Notice the provocations, create the pause, manage your state, respect your silence, use your capacity with integrity, and watch what changes. Not just in how others relate to you, but in how you relate to yourself. You'll become quieter, but you'll also become stronger. You'll speak less, but when you do speak, people will listen. You'll defend less, but you'll be more secure. You'll live less creatively and more intentionally. And in that shift, you'll discover something that most people never find. Freedom. Not freedom from other people, but freedom from needing them to move you. And that, my friend, is everything. Final closing message. Before we part, I want to circle back to where we started. I said people don't test your strength. They test how easily they can make you lose control. And I want to revise that slightly now. People will always test. It's what people do. It's built into our social nature to test boundaries, to probe for weakness, to see what moves people. But whether they can make you lose control, that's up to you. And that's the entire revolution of what we've discussed. It's not about becoming someone who can never be provoked. That person doesn't exist. We're all provocable. We all have triggers. We all have moments where emotion arises and the impulse to react is strong. But it is possible to become someone who can be provoked and not lose control. Someone who feels the reaction and chooses the response. Someone who remains grounded even when someone is deliberately trying to shake them. And that's worth everything. Because freedom doesn't come from perfection. Freedom comes from sovereignty. It comes from understanding that you're in charge, that your reactions are not destiny, that your emotional state is something you can influence. It comes from knowing that even when the world is trying to move you, you have the option to stay still. So as you move forward, as you encounter the provocations and the difficult people and the moments where you're tempted to retreat, remember the pause. Remember that there's space between stimulus and response. Remember that you have options. Remember that silence is not weakness, that calm is not passivity, that the person who remains unmoved is the one who actually has the power. And remember that you're building something every single time you choose not to react, every single time you pause, every single time you stay grounded when someone is trying to move you. You're building freedom. Not just freedom from other people's control, but freedom within yourself. Freedom to be who you actually are, beneath all the defensive reactions. Freedom to move through the world with intention rather than compulsion. That's the gift of the psychology of silence. And it's waiting for you. It's available to you. It's yours to develop. Whenever you're ready. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging with this material. Thank you for being open to the possibility that you could move through the world differently than you have before. That openness is the beginning of everything. So go, pause when they provoke. Stay grounded when they push. Remain silent when they expect a reaction. And discover what it feels like to be unmoved. Because in that unmoved quality, in that grounded presence, you'll find something most people never find. You'll find yourself. And you'll find that you were always powerful. You just needed to know it.